Understanding the ingredients that go into making a proper tropical fish food are integral for that product to be able to perform. So today, we're going to continue off where we left off before in part 2 today of our interview with the one and only Mr. Les Wilson. So sit back and enjoy. I guess the next step then is, how do you go about assessing, not necessarily the individual components like fish meal or squid or clam. Those are based on depending on what animal you're feeding. But how do you base on level of proteins versus carbs versus fats versus, how do you assess and build those building blocks as to what kind of percentages or portions do you go?
Well, it kind of goes back to, we'll start with carbs. Really, fish don't use carbs. They don't have the metallic ability to deal with them. So when you look, there's actually a slide on my thing. People always think, if you understand that fish don't use carbs, you always wonder, well, why do you have flour in your foods?
It's the same as dog food. You can't make a dry shelf stable product without putting some of these products in there.
Yeah, we could use it as a binder. And in my talks, I always mention how many people have made chocolate chip cookies from scratch in their lifetime, right? Basically, everybody in North America has made chocolate chip cookies. And if you added your eggs, your protein, your butter as your fat, and then all your other accessory things, say your nuts and chocolate chips and your sugar in there for that component, but you don't put the binder in, you don't put the flour in, you try to mix it all together and put it on a cookie sheet, what would happen? And it'd be a mess, right? And that's what we do with fish food, is we're blending our proteins. In this case, it's, like you said, squid or salmon or some sort of fish meal. And then our fats, and in our case, we typically use tuna oils because it's a great complement to the salmon meal that we make, or we use in our flake. They blend really well together. They have a great amino acid complex that's complements each other. And then the tuna is fantastic as an attractant. So you got your eggs, you got your butter. And in this case, we got our fish meals, we have our tuna oil, and then we have all of our accessory components and proteins that are the rest of that entire thing. But wheat flour as a carb is always up pretty high. It's normally the second or third ingredient because the ratio of the wheat flour to proteins and fats is almost identical to a chocolate chip cookie. In the recipes that I use, it's 2 eggs, a stick of butter, basically a stick and a half of butter, and 3 cups of flour. And when you do 3 cups of flour next to 2 eggs and a thing, it's a massive amount of flour to bind all that together to make that cookie. And in essence,
from a nutritional standpoint, though, like if your carbs and your proteins are at 50-50, that's normal. But if you raise one up, the other one has to go down. Like they always run in that balance, right?
Exactly. And if you see a formula that's different than that, and I'll highlight one of our formulas that we clearly state on our jar that this is a supplemental food, is our shrimp pellets.
Right.
Shrimp pellets that we sell are the shrimp pellets that have been around for decades, and they come directly out of shrimp farming. That's not a any special formula that Cobalt does. We buy that from the shrimp industry and package it in our food as a supplemental protein. But it's designed to feed shrimp. And what do shrimp eat? Detritus, most of the time, right? And so the plant matter. So they can actually eat that and digest that flour. And so if you look at that one, you look at the protein level and the fat level. The protein level is like in the 30s, and I think it's like 7% fat. But we have this wheat flour or wheat middlings is the very top ingredient, and that's out of balance for most fish foods. But it's designed specifically originally for feeding shrimp, and in this case, it's just a filler supplement to augment, say, like people that like to feed live goldfish to their Oscars per se, but they're not getting all the other vitamins and accessory stuff that we put in there. That's where the shrimp meal comes in. They're cheap, and they fulfill all those base nutrition requirements that you wouldn't get from just feeding live goldfish. But in that case, if you look at that one, you can see, if you now understand that ratio of cookie making to fish food, you can see that it's out of balance on that label, and that's why we say it's an accessory food. It's designed to be a supplement or an accessory. It's not a full nutritional program. Where our others, like one of the ones that I have my screen over here that I keep looking at. And the other one is
waving at him.
Yeah, is our spirulina diet. And if you look at the back label, you'll see protein, fat, fiber, moisture, and phosphorus in that order every time, because that's what we're regulated by AFCO to put it in there. And there are all these minimum proteins we have to hit, or minimum or maximum levels. We have to hit that. We declare that. So that's all done by us. Like, okay, we're saying we have 45% protein in this. And we put that on there. We have to hit it, and we get tested constantly with that. But you'll see a typical fish food should be in the 40s and in the double digits, low teens, or 10 to somewhere in that range, depending on the exact target animals of fat. And then you should have that carb in there, relatively high percentage, second or third ingredient again, so that you can make the flake.
Yeah.
And we've tried like crazy to get away from basically a non-digestible or non-usable carbohydrate for fish by switching to all sorts of different other binders that are out there. But we just haven't found the right one to get the palatability correct, because once you change it, you're changing that binder, the palatability changes because it's no longer a wheat-based cookie, it's a whatever-based cookie. And we've got some to work, but the cost is just outrageous. Nobody would ever buy it. It's 10 times the cost of what we do today. So it's a balance.
We've had in Canada is you guys had the entry, this line here. I don't want to call it an entry line because it's a very good comprehensive line, and I've used this one for a while. And then you had like the algae pellets and things like that. And then you came out with this other line, and I've never seen it in Canada yet because it's just so cost prohibitive the way the Canadian dollar is compared to the American dollar. And if I may be wrong, but you guys manufacture this in Europe, am I correct?
No, that actually comes from Taiwan.
Okay.
And we manufacture it there specifically because we want the freshest, basically, seafood at a reasonable cost. Yeah. Even though you say it's not reasonable, that's it's.
No, I don't mean it that way. As a negative. It's just it becomes cost prohibitive because once you import it, and then you have all the duties and everything, get it across the border, and then the exchange and all those things. Then by the time it hits the retailers, the end consumer looks at it and it's just like a sticker shock. But if the end consumer could actually be educated enough, hopefully with videos like this and getting that message out there and actually read this section, they would understand that they would feed far less of this with better nutrition, even over a very good product like this. This is the
pellets. The pellets are absolutely the next generation of food.
Yes.
We don't use any meal except for one in that, and it's a squid meal because we can't get a consistent supply of squid. Everything else is whole in that. So when you read the back of that, it's whole sword prawn, whole scad, whole anchovies, whole sardines, and then there's a whole host of accessory proteins depending on the exact formulation. We use whole garlic as a stimulant and antioxidant. Garlic actually is a triple threat ingredient. It's a immunostimulant. It's an appetite and palatability stimulant, and then it's also a great antioxidant to help with digestion. But we put whole cloves of garlic right into that, and that once it gets all mashed up and then sent through the extruder, it's cooked completely different than any other pellet that I'm aware of that's out there. That actually gets cooked at low temperatures and low pressure for 14 hours.
Yeah, this food is a game changer. But the sad reality that I know it's performing very well because I've seen it all over the States and so forth. It's just not as much in Canada. And are you guys in Europe? Is he in Europe as well? Do you guys sell in Europe?
We don't export to Europe because it's we do pre and probiotics in the food.
Yes.
And so it's the laws to get viable bacteria from the US to the EU because of things like mad cow is very difficult. So we don't export to Europe. We export all over North America and some to Asia and South America, but nothing to Europe.
But I look at this product as it's almost like it's it's like I reference everything to like dog nutrition because like in Canada, I represent a world-renowned brand of dog food, and they manufacture everything using whole ingredients like you guys do. And all that math that you deal with on a label is drastically changed when you're using a fresh raw fish that's got all that moisture and everything into it, and then you cook it down. Your protein levels change. Everything on your label changes drastically. So they have to always make sure balancing it. But I remember when that food came out, and it's been around for close to 20 years now, it was the game changer then. And I don't think that mentality has really reached the fish level yet. It's got to get there because this is a game changer food.
And one of the two little silly tidbits about that. One, I mentioned whole fish. We actually don't use the whole fish. I lied. Okay. We descale the fish first.
Yeah, okay.
And why do we do that? Is because the scales are very, almost, there's not a lot of direct nutrition in there. And we end up with a higher ash content because of that, which means you end up with more physical waste. So little details like that, that's one of the things I'll always say we use whole, but in reality, we actually send those fish through a descaler to pull those scales off to keep the end product that the fish excretes at a lower waste content.
Well, we have the same situation on the pet food side, on the dog food side, where all these manufacturers globally were selling salmon foods. I don't personally eat fish, but you go to any market, you buy salmon. It's a very premium price. It's higher than steak in most places. Do you honestly think in dog nutrition that the average place is literally buying the entire salmon and throwing it in there? No, they're buying the off product, which is going to be the head, the rack, and the fins. Again, like you say, has very, very low nutritional value.
And on the back of the label, if you go to the flake, you'll see it says fish meal or salmon meal, depends on the formula that you have there. But salmon meal, if you say it's salmon meal, it has to be whole fish by AFCO regulations. That doesn't mean that somebody can't report it wrong on there, but we follow the letter of the law or the letter of the guideline. So ours are actually whole salmon, but they're not. They're a pink. If you're familiar with salmon, the pink salmon they're super bony and people don't like to eat them, and they're a huge run every year up in Alaska, and they harvest them specifically for animal feeds because it's a huge protein source, but people don't like them. They're not like a sockeye or a king salmon that people.
But it's also a sustainable source too.
Absolutely,
it's very important. Yeah. It's ethically very important too.
Yeah, but the salmon. But there are you can go buy salmon parts meal, or there's another term for it. But salmon parts is the easiest one that I can think of off the top of my head. And if you're using that, that's when you're using basically the skeleton of the filleted salmon, and you end up with not a lot of fat, not a lot of protein, and a lot of ash and a lot of waste.
Yeah, if your ash content goes up because you got to cook it, and bone just cooks down.
That's super cheap. You can buy that all day long, really, really cheap. If you want to have a good quality formulation and you're worried about your water quality, the fish excrement that we talk about, and making sure that you're feeding your fish something that's good for them, you need to make sure that whatever you're feeding is using. If they're using a meal, which it's next to impossible not to use a meal and make a flake. There's only a handful of companies, one has a patent on it to not use meal. So basically everybody's using meal. So make sure that it's a quality meal.
Yeah. As you say, there's very different degrees of meals available. Yeah.
But again, back to that ultra pellet, that one we don't use, except for squid meal, because it's really hard to get a stable, fresh supply of squid. Everything else is fresh seafood, and it's in general the whole animal and the whole component. Except, like I mentioned, we descale the fish because that's just extra waste that isn't going to be digested. It's going to go right into the fish and right out the back end of the fish. So we take that extra effort and take that out so that we're not just adding that into the food. But everything else goes through. I have a smoker. I do a lot of barbecuing, and it's like this is like the barbecue version, of the fish food.
I remember when you guys where you kind of sent me containers of this at the very, very beginning when it was about to launch, and I was like, this is a game changer. This is a great, great product. Every one of the labels, every one of the formulas, and I have only small containers of it. And every time I go to the States, I buy some and I bring it back because that's the only place I can get it.
Yeah, it's hard for us. There's all sorts of even though it's an open border with NAFTA or whatever NAFTA is called now, I always forget. It's there's still a huge permit process. Every shipment that we send up to Canada has to have a specific permit for that customer. For like your company, we get a permit. Every shipment gets a permit to get across the border, and it's got to have all the documentation behind it. It's
a lot. These are all things that the average consumer that has 1 or 2 tanks that goes to the store to buy a can of food, they would never know any of these things. They wouldn't have a clue. No disrespect, but they wouldn't have a clue what goes on behind the scenes on these things.
Like I said, thank you, Michael Vick, for making everything pets difficult. It's not only just understanding fish nutrition, but then you got to use legal ingredients. You got to understand import-export laws, and we have annual permits that from the USDA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, APHIS, that we have to do all the time. Every year we have to get those permits, and then we have all the different states, and then like for Canada, every shipment.
I would never thought about individual states. I would never have thought of that.
It's crazy.
You just stand there, and it's like hands are constantly going in and out of your pockets.
Yeah, when you first start that, you don't realize how much, it's thousands of dollars per state sometimes, every year.
Someone's going into the pet store and they're going to go and buy a jar of food outside of picking up Cobalt. If you're telling this is your one chance to kind of tell, get in their ear and say, flip the can around. What are they looking for? What's the most important thing that people need to know when they actually look at a jar of food?
Well, if you flip it around and look at the label, there's 2 main components. Well, there's normally 3 on the back. One is the hero copy, or whatever the kind of the sales pitch part of it is. And that's where they'll describe a little bit about whatever the manufacturer. We normally just kind of say, kind of what fish it's for, and, help your color, help your growth, whatever. But there's a hero copy section. So understand that what is it about that food that the manufacturer really wants you to know about it. That's the first thing. And then the 2 other things that are really probably the most important are we call it the GA, the guaranteed analysis, and the ingredient list. So the GA, by U.S. law, and therefore that's pretty much what's in Canada, because Canada doesn't mandate any of this. So it's by U.S. law, you have to have protein, fat, fiber, moisture, and phosphorus in that order on there. And then on ours, we also have probiotic bacteria in there to help enhance the digestion. And you have to have the minimum, or the total microorganisms with the minimum CFUs per gram. And we do 1 million CFUs per gram on ours. So what that is coliform forming units. Basically, there's 1 million bioactive bacteria ready to go in every gram of food is what that means.
Yeah.
And so that's all got to be done by independent labs for us, and we supply as part of our permitting process. And then at any moment, the U.S. federal government, the Canadian government, or any state AFCO agency, whether it's the state chemist or whoever it happens to be, can test us and verify our results. And if they don't come in, then we have to answer to that somehow, for whatever reason, if it doesn't come in.
And it could
generally come in, because we're trying to supply a premium product. But that protein, fat, fiber, moisture, and phosphorus. So what you're looking for, in general, I'll just talk generalities for fish. You should be looking at something in the 40-ish range of protein. Now, if you're talking tropheus and maybe goldfish, things that have protein-sensitive guts, that might change a little bit. But with our foods, we don't worry about that too much because we have the probiotics in there, and the probiotics really suppress those bloat-forming bacteria in those more sensitive fish. So we can have higher levels of protein in our food for those guys because the probiotics help them get through that, and we competitively exclude those pathogenic bacteria, basically.
That's a good point, because one of these individuals I've known for years that is a large hardcore tropheus breeder, specialized diet. The digestive tract on herbivores, I have on average 10 times the length of the body versus on a piscivore it's only about 3 times. So protein go through them fast, but in a herbivore it can't. And this guy here is successful feeding a super high protein food, much higher than any of these ones on your labels, but water runs through that system 24/7. Everything's constant all the time.
So anyway, I'm sidetracked with that. So look for a protein somewhere in the 40s, and then a goldfish could be on the high end of the low 40s, but somewhere maybe 35 to 42, somewhere in there. That's going to be a good protein range for goldfish. Okay. And then your fat should be on most diets should be in the 10s to low teens, depending on, again, the formulation. And then fiber, basically fiber is a measure of the possible waste component. So you really want to kind of minimize the amount of fiber as much as you can, but also realize that the fiber is also kind of showing what levels of binder you have to some extent as well. So understand if it's a flake or depending on how the pellet is processed, you're going to have that binder in there. So there's going to be some fiber in there, but the higher the fiber, basically the more solid waste you're going to get. Mm-hmm. Another thing that you'll hear a lot about along those lines in a lot of fish nutrition talks, and you might even see it on some labels. We don't publish it because we're not required to. So we don't do anything that we're not required to on reporting anything, is ash. And ash content.
Don't generally do that anyways, but there is a mathematical equation to figure out how much ash content's in your foods.
Yep. But that's another, it's kind of similar to fiber in that it's really showing kind of what you're going to end up with, the amount of waste in the food in general.
And it's always very, usually what, a 3% or something? It's always very.
It depends. It can be upwards of 8 sometimes. Okay. But it just depends on the formulation. And then also
depends on the cooking process, really. It is actually ash.
And it also can have to do with your protein source. Like if you're buying a really bony protein source, a lot of the bones become ash and they're not digestible. And so
like that salmon rack we were talking about.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Yep. Higher ash content.
So you see fiber and ash kind of blend together, but you'll hear that a lot of times. And a lot of the old school guys always talk about ash because it's always part basically of any nutritional assay that you get back from a lab will always have ash content. But again, AFCO doesn't require us to put it on there. So we're not going to put it on there.
You will find it on any label of anything, any pet food related thing, dog food, cat food, anything in North America.
Yeah, occasionally you'll see it on a fish food here and there, but more of the kind of the old school formulas, you'll still see it. Anything that you put on a label, you're now held to. So if you do decide to put ash on there, even though it's not required, if you say maximum ash of 3% and it comes in at 8, you're going to get busted by the U.S. government or the state governments.
And that is something that could fluctuate percentage within a percentage because not every meal is exactly the same, and you're dealing with natural products, so they can fluctuate. A fattier fish, or there's all sorts of fluctuations.
Yep. And then moisture is kind of the next one down. That moisture, that's a maximum number on the label, and basically that is kind of giving you like what's your moisture content is kind of how much water are you paying for in reality. So we try to keep, and on our side, moisture is always basically the death of a food. If you have too high of a moisture content, if you leave it in your high humidity fish room open, you're almost guaranteed you're going to get some sort of fungus or mold growing on it really quick. That's why you keep it sealed. So we don't use any preservatives in any of our food. We don't add any ethoxyquin or anything like that into our foods at all. We control our shelf life and our quality against fungus and that by having sterile cook environments and then keeping our moistures really low. The lower you keep the moisture, the more food you're actually getting per pound, and we can control it spoiling a lot better. So
when you walk into a store and you see they buy the big giant jar or something, and then you see the kid walk around the fish department with a wet mitt, just throwing his hand in there, going in each tank, and then just goes back on the shelf. I always tell people, it's so hard to say that message. And that's probably one thing that I really like the best about this food is you don't buy this in 10 pounds and 20 pounds. You buy this in a reasonable size. Even though there is a jar that's twice this size, I believe, and you buy it in that size, and you might go, well, I've got a giant fish room. Yeah, but the smaller the container, the better their nutrition, the more stable it's going to be. I usually buy in these sort of sizes, and I keep them in the freezer.
Yeah.
And once this one's empty, then I'll open up another one, or I'll open up one and pour some in here, and always keep it in the freezer just to keep it a little bit more stable.
So the only thing about the freezer, depending on your freezer temperature, you got to be careful with our food, is we do have probiotic bacteria in there. And if there is any moisture, they're in a cyst form on there that they'll reactivate, right once they're in the gut. But if there's any moisture inside of that and you're freezing them, there is a chance that you're going to pierce the cell membrane of the bacteria and kill the bacteria. So if you're going to do that by a bulk, we always recommend keeping it in the refrigerator above 0 or above 32 Fahrenheit. You can keep it right down to 33 if you want, or whatever your normal refrigerator temperature. That's going to help prolong it, but you're not going to kill the bacteria. And
there you go, guys. Don't listen to this guy. Listen to that guy.
But just by freezing it doesn't mean you're going to kill all the bacteria, but there is a chance you're increasing your likelihood that you will.
Well, every hardcore hobbyist over the years would always buy in bulk, and we'd always store it in the freezer. I never thought about that. I would never have thought
that helps with every other component except for the bacteria. So the other thing the reason that we have even a shelf life on our food is for the vitamin C content. Yep. So vitamin C is very volatile. Even though we use a stabilized C that we put into ours, it will degrade over time. And when it reaches 70% of what we formulated at, coming right off the flaker or the pellet machine, then we consider it expired. And that happens under normal circumstances if it's kept in a normal house or environment. Happens in about 2 years. So we have a 2-year shelf life because the vitamin C will degrade to the point where it's lower than 70% of our intended value that we started with. Okay. So it's not that it's expired. You can't feed it. You can absolutely feed, as long as it's not moldy and nasty. You could feed fish food forever. I have some of our original, still to this day, it's super running. I have a goldfish tank in the house that has my daughter's, my last goldfish for my daughter's science experiment when she was in the 3rd grade, however long ago it was. And I have one of the original bag of blue pellets that we made, the original prototype run. And I've had this Ziploc bag. It was probably 8 pounds of this way back when. Blue pellets. That's all that goldfish gets. He's the last of 6. All he's ate his whole life is blue pellets. And he's in a little 10-gallon tank in a completely wrong place in the house, up against the window. He's been there for, I don't know, 12 years or whatever. And all he gets is it's completely covered in cyanobacteria. It's a horrible tank. My wife hates it, but he's a 13-year-old fish who's been feeding exclusively on blue pellets for the last 10 years.
And if you were to dissect him, I bet you inside everything would be perfect condition and healthy, right?
Yeah, he's a great little fish, but yeah, he's the last one. All the others jumped, but yeah. No
Any last things to offer on nutrition?
Say again?
Any last minute things you want to add on the nutrition?
Well, the last thing on the GA is the phosphorus. That's probably the most important thing on there. If you look at proteins, fat, fiber, like proteins are, a whole gamut, but they only call them out as one. Fats, there's HUFAs and PUFAs and LFAs and all this, things that we worry about. And there's a whole thing we could talk about on fats. But there are a whole bunch of them. They're all combined into one. There's only really one thing that is nutritionally on there is a single item, and it's phosphorus. Super important, and you want to make sure that there is phosphorus in there around the 1% level. Phosphorus is key in bone and other cellular and functions, specifically the mitochondria. If you remember your high school biology, the powerhouse of the cells where we get all our energy. Something called ATP was adenosine triphosphate, 3 phosphates, the diphosphate. And that whole process is based on phosphorus, and you need to have it in your diet. It's so important that the AFCO regulators, it's the only one basically mineral that's on there that is called out specifically.
Now, would you have phosphorus regularly occurring in the food, but do you have to add it just to have a marker on there?
As long as you have it, as long as you have a good protein and fat source, and you have it in the right quantities, you're gonna have phosphorus in there. So you need to make sure that whatever diet you have is got it listed and it's at a reasonable level. Again, it should be plus or minus 1%. If you go,
I looked at all 4 of the ones that I have here. They're all exactly in that range.
And marine people freak out about it because they always are trying to control their phosphates. And so anytime they see, for years when we first started Cobalt, all the marine guys, oh, you have phosphorus in your food, and they wouldn't even take a free sample. And they don't understand that if you don't feed phosphorus to your fish, the fish are going to die. They're just in, you want to control your phosphates in a marine aquarium, but you can't do that by not feeding your fish phosphorus. And even if you think by feeding them, brine or some sort of frozen food that has an illegal package and doesn't call it out, you have to call it out, and they're in there. So it's an important part of it.
And even if you have phosphorus in your water, is it freshwater fish? Freshwater fish are always drinking water to bring salts into their system. Saltwater fish don't drink. They're always expelling salts, right? So if you had just phosphorus in your water, the marine fish would never get it anyways.
Yeah. Right. They need to be uptaking it. They need to be ingesting phosphorus all the time.
Yeah. And that's where all these that's why I call them highly engineered foods. Be it a flake food, when you see flake foods and all the different colors with a lot of manufacturers, like this one's this component, this one's this component, and you mix them together. But if the fish only eats one colored flake, you might be missing out. And then they come up with pellet foods, and that's what I call engineered, really engineered, or astronaut foods. That's a complete meal in a pellet.
Yep.
So, no, that's wonderful, my friend. I'm sure there's going to be tons of questions that are going to get posted on this thing. So, when I do post it up, it might be a couple of weeks down the road. But once I do post it up, if you kind of follow through with it and maybe answer some of the questions, because I'm sure some of them are going to come back. They're going to be,
Again, I have a talk that we could motor through and like go down and talk about specific components. We kind of talked at a kind of a more macro level today. But if you, there's some YouTube videos we have up on our site and around if you want to learn more about the fatty acid complexes that we worry about, or the 26 amino acids that we worry about. We have that. Or if you're a club and you're looking for speakers, whether they're virtually or once we can travel again. Normally when I'm traveling, I go out 6 to 8 times a year to clubs or organizations for their, just a monthly meeting or, an event like ALA or ACA. We'll go out and do those talks as well. So if you're looking for speakers, happy to come out and talk in nutrition on that. But yeah, there's a whole bunch more we could talk about. And sadly, it's an exciting subject to me. And so, there's a lot to know.
I think we're going to do a second part. Well, you guys, you heard it from the man himself. Thank you very much, Les, for being with me today.
No problem. Thank you.